Babel, a very complex film, and quite strange, I guess, to see as a script. I think you've said, it's an intriguing story, but, what was the challenge? Until, I guess, it was explained.
Well, I'd long wanted to work with Alejandro, and we'd tried on previous occasions, and it hadn't quite worked out for one reason or another. And he's a very seductive man. I didn't particularly want to work. And I'd read the script, and, it's an astonishing script. And it's one of those scripts, a little bit like Todd Haynes' film about Bob Dylan. Yes, in that you know that it wouldn't make sense to any other director, that it's conceived for this particular person to direct. I had very little dialogue, and in the end, that was the challenge I had, I suppose, which was the antithesis of Notes on a Scandal, where it was try to shut the characters up. And I, for one, love not talking on film. So it was, in a strange way, it was a bit of a dream job, lie on the ground and don't say very much.
Are you aware of the whole picture when you actually are involved, or are you only aware of your bit?
A few of us had the full script, but not all the crew members did. So it was a little bit like working on a featurette. And you knew that the part that you were working on would make its full, most complete sense when juxtaposed and interwoven with the other stories. I mean, and I think that's where his genius lies, is that it's not only what was going on in the scene, it's how it affects and folds into the other narratives.
What is kind of extraordinary is that you've really been only acting on big screen for 10 years, and you've made over 25 films, which by any standards is hardly rarity value. I mean, that's a heck of a lot of movies in a very short period.
Oh dear,
it sounds almost, I was going to say, almost
pathological.
You used the word, I don't. But that's a lot of movies. That's, my maths, that's 2.5 a year or something.
Is it?
Well, isn't it? Something like that, anyway. But my maths is probably, that'd be right.
Yeah,
yes.
gosh.
Anyway, it's a lot of movies in a short period of time. But going back to beginnings, but obviously drama school and then a kind of very interesting period of theatre there with a lot of other actors who've since gone on, like you, to do a lot of movies and so on. But I was just wondering also, you were quite young when that sort of new wave of Australian filmmaking was happening, sort of from mid-70s onwards. Peter Weir, First Flash, and Bruce Beresford with Fred Skepsey and so on. I mean, at the age of 7, I mean, were people of your kind of age aware of new Australian cinema, or was it just us abroad that saw those films? I mean, was it still Alvin Purple and Barry Mackenzie?
Well, I think the first Australian film that I saw, that stayed with me in a haunting way was Picnic at Hanging Rock. Yeah. But I mostly spent my time in the theatre. That was what my parents did, and the films I watched were horror movies. And someone deep in Freudian analysis the other week told me that was probably because I was trying to expurgate, or deal with the death of my father, which I thought was quite interesting. But so I wanted to be Basil Rathbone, and I watched a lot of Sherlock Holmes films and The Scarlet Claw. That's where I was.
You did some television, of course, so I was getting used to cameras and so on, but you were actually sort of mid to late 20s when I think Paradise Road was the first movie.
It's okay, you can say old.
Sorry, I don't want to be gratuitously offensive. But I mean, so many people start making movies from the age of 18, 19 and so on, and you were sort of reasonably mature by then. I can't believe there weren't sort of film offers before then, especially as you'd had a lot of success on stage.
My agent in Australia was saying, look, she sat me down one day, and I think I just finished playing Ophelia, and I was in a tour, and she said, look, you've really got to make a film. She said, before it's too late. And I said, well, someone has to cast me. And the thing that was great for me, actually, there was a casting director called Liz Mulliner, and she used to call me in to be a reader. And I would go in like 2 or 3 times a week and read opposite actors. So even though I wasn't necessarily auditioning, I was working in the theatre, I wasn't necessarily auditioning a lot myself, I was watching how actors sort of sabotage themselves as soon as they walk in the room, and also how people make the decisions as soon as you've walked through the door. So I began to take my auditions less personally, actually, and so I think I became better at auditioning, and therefore maybe...
So started getting the roles.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Paradise Road, which was your first film, it was actually rather a nice way, I suspect, to get involved in international filmmaking in a way, one with a terrific cast, Again with Bruce Beresford, who had sort of been in that first flush of the Australian New Wave, and this was, I suppose, the second flush. I don't know whether that's the right word. But you were playing the character, because I actually met those old ladies. When they came and opened the film here, a lot of them are still around and still alive. The character's Susan McCarthy, I think she was called.
Yes, it was about the nurses.
This was kind of Tenko. I don't know if you've seen Paradise Road.
Yeah.
This was about imprisoned BOW ladies in
Sumatra.
Yeah.
Yes, my character was sort of seen, the film was seen through my character's eyes, and there were a lot of, probably too many characters in the film, but it was a great Jennifer Ely, Julianne Margulies, Frances McDormand, Glenn Close, there were Pauline Collins. There was a fantastic group of women, and I learned an enormous amount.
A lot of fighting for screen time? Or was it all very gentle and sweet?
Not from my end. I mean, Bruce is hilarious. We've been talking about doing things since. But he came up to me one day and said, "Look, I don't know whether you're making your accent more broad than it is, but no one can understand you." But I think, and one of the producers said it was absolutely fine. But Bruce had, I suppose, being part of that first wave, had a chip on his shoulder and been, aware that when Mad Max went to the States, that there was a moment there where they wanted to dub it, because people were so unused to hearing the Australian accent. So, I think a lot has changed.
That, it's, I'm going to say led on, but Oscar and Lucinda then, I suppose, was the kind of the first big, anyways, international film, certainly ones that we became most aware in a leading role, and I think actually a lovely film. I don't know whether it has happy memories for you. I thought it was a particularly... and of course, again, with Gillian Armstrong, who was part of that new wave later on.
And with lovely Rafe. No, it was great. I was extremely lucky that Fox was coming into Australia, and that Bruce Beresford really thought to have me. It was a Fox film, and then they got me cheap, and then they wanted me to do 2 other films, so it was great. So it meant I got to play... It was easier for Jill Armstrong to then fight for an Australian, to play an Australian role, rather than get someone, say, like Winona Ryder or someone to come in, because, I was sort of suddenly attractive to Fox. And then I made a film called Pushing Tin, which sort of took me to America.
But yes, but time-wise, I think Elizabeth came before that. It came before Pushing Tin.
Yes, it did.
Because, Shekhar Kapoor saw, I think, a show reel of footage from Oscar and Lucinda, or so it said. I never quite whether to believe these things or not. And that was what kind of determined him on you.
That's what he told me.
Oh, right,
yes.
Fine, so that's kind of true. But, did that come, that was a kind of a big move, wasn't it? The Elizabeth role. That was.
Oh, absolutely. In terms of working internationally, I think it's what made my nationality a bit dubious. That somehow I arrived in America and people didn't know whether I was English or Australian, and maybe that sort of having that sort of ambiguity about it opened up a kind of a myriad of roles and therefore accents.
One of the things kind of interesting, not only your casting, was in a sense the casting of Shekhar Kapoor to direct it. That was an ambitious piece of casting in terms of working title. I think
it felt at the time, it was an incredibly sort of risky little endeavour. You had this director from Bollywood who'd finished making a film about Pulan Devi, the Bandit Queen, and myself, an Australian. And it's not that that's a handicap, but maybe not the first immediate choice to play Elizabeth I. And I think it was kind of our renegade sensibilities that maybe gave it at the time that sort of unusual edge.
But you're also surrounded by British acting royalty, everyone from the Lord Attenborough and all these people.
But people really cast against type.
Yeah.
You don't think of Cathy Burke as playing a Tudor queen.
Not.
And what I didn't sort of realise this, it was my first sort of interface with, I suppose, class prejudice in terms of what actors play. Christopher Eccleston coming from the north, then playing a duke. And I think it gave the casting, Eric Cantona playing the French ambassador. It was highly unusual. And what was great about Shekhar is that he really, often, you think you could be acting your socks off, but you may as well be acting to the wall, because then they're covering, your ankles. And what Shekhar did is he really focused on the journey of Elizabeth and shaped the film accordingly. So it was he had a great belief in me, which
I think
I'm
that's
grateful.
what you meant to say the first time.
Probably,
around.
yes,
We
it
forgot,
was.
yeah.
Yes.
Now, the end of the film does have the usual stuff at the top. She reigned another 40 years, and what happened to one or two of the characters. I mean, you could not have presumably imagined there wasn't presumably at the time talk of doing the sequel, was, or perhaps there was?
No, Shaker and I talked about doing a film about an Australian stunt woman who worked in Bollywood films called Nadia Wadia, but we weren't talking about of doing Elizabeth. I didn't sort of see that there was a sequel in there, and that's what I liked about the film. It was simply what it was. And so when they began talking about it, I said, I think that's what I was going to say, is I said, to the first one, I said, why do it? I mean, Glenda Jackson's done it. So many people have done it, played her. What could I be adding to the the interpretation of her? And it was Shaker's take on the film, playing loose and fast with history. He fought, in a really constructive way. I would bring up the history books and say, but this did not happen then, Shaker. And, he's saying, I don't know, it doesn't matter. And and that's what I love about him, is ultimately he's making a film about something else entirely and using the character, the framework of Elizabeth's life on which to hang these other things. So the Golden Age, which we finished, he was interested in immortality. And I was very interested in the aging process, having aged 9 years. But where... And I'm glad that much time passed between the first one and making another one, because I think now I'm at the stage where perhaps there's something different to say.
Is it fair to say that it was an important part of the career by winning? I don't know the prizes are that important, but presumably it didn't hurt.
Oh, look, it was absolutely fantastic. It did open a lot of doors for me, but I suppose what the scripts that were sent to me then were playing many unhappy monarchs throughout history, and so a lot of corsets. And I suppose then I realised, okay, I've got to risk unemployment, and I've done that. And so when Mike Newell approached me and said, could I do an American accent? I went, well, I've been in a couple of mammoths. I've done them on stage, and it should be fine. He said, well, I'm not American, and you're not American, so I'll have to trust you. And then I played this Long Island housewife opposite John Cusack. And that was great, because, they came out in quick succession, and not planning it, but I think it was juxtaposing that, and then with the talent of Mr. Ripley. But
in some terms, actually quite small roles. There are some...
I love a small role.
Well, but some actors will say, my career, and I need, dare I say, I remember Michael Caine saying, look, I'm a star, I'm not a supporting actor. The fact that he's actually won 2 Oscars subsequently for playing supporting roles.
Poor dear.
Something belies that, exactly, yes. So he obviously decided to bite the bullet at some point. But at this stage of the career, it seemed to be just to do with good material, and you have to get involved with it. There wasn't a suggestion that I will only go for, or the agent would say, no, she's only going to take big roles.
Babel, I'm in a very small portion of it.
Yeah.
As I said, it's the project, it's the opportunity. Like in the shipping news, I die on page 9, and I was offered the other role, but I wasn't particularly interested in it. It didn't seem I could offer anything new or different, or it wasn't really a stretch. And it was. I said, "Oh, can I have that one, please? That nasty woman who dies."
Which moves us neatly on to a rather odd film, I think, The Gift, which is a kind of genre film, I was going to say. It's, and I think it's, I don't know, I again read, and you're going to tell me I'm entirely wrong, that you don't really believe in psychic stuff and so on, and here you are playing a woman with the gift has a psychic gift.
When I read the script, it was very much about a woman who was coming to terms with her own grief at her husband's death. And I think in the final cut of the film, a lot of that stuff went, and a lot of the ooga booga stuff stayed. But I still kept that sense, and so that was the emotional connection for me. But I love it. The privilege and the fascination of being an actor is that you get to sort of inhabit and explore, pockets of humanity that you sort of previously didn't know much about. So I went to a lot of psychics, and then I met this one woman in Savannah where we were shooting, and it was very odd. She was actually a real estate agent, And she'd given it all up. She'd given it all up because she'd actually used to work for the FBI. When they got to the end of their process of trying to locate a dead body, they'd call her, and so she'd sit in a chair with a piece of the clothing of the missing person, and would invariably lead them to the body. She did a reading for me, and she made some bizarre predictions. She said, "You're going to wear a dress that's going to change your life," and I said, "Okay." And she said, "And you're going to play a character, a woman who's very ahead of her time. She's very tough, but she's in danger. She's got all her short hair, and all I could think of is Guavin, Guervin, and you're going to have 2 bodyguards." And I said, "Okay." And that year I went to the Oscars and got an enormous amount of attention from a frock I wore. And then 2 years later I found myself on the set of Veronica Guerin in Ireland. And the case of the people who had actually shot Veronica Guerin was coming up. So my Irish agent very protectively had requested that I have bodyguards on set. And so I turned around to get in the car with my short hair, playing Veronica Guerin, and there were these 2 bodyguards around me. And yes, it's a coincidence, but I did suddenly went, oh God.
I was just wondering about the question of playing real people, as opposed to sort of, going to psychics and so on for when you're researching for just a character. But Veronica Guerin was a very brave but with an interesting kind of life. And I mean, with someone like that, was it a question of a lot of research there? And how accurate the character we see on screen was? How do we think that she really was?
It's very difficult for me to be objective about that. Her parent, or her mother, at the end of the shoot, did say some fantastic, very rewarding things to me. And the most useful thing to me, actually, she gave, because she was in the public eye quite a lot for a journalist, and I got all of her television interviews, and but the most useful tool, really, for me was the radio interviews she gave. Because I don't look like Veronica Guerin, and you have to get as close as you can. But of course there's more license than when you play someone like Katharine Hepburn, who is being received in the same medium by the same people who have received her performances. There's more license with Veronica Guerin because she wasn't an actor on screen, and therefore her physicality is not as well known. But the radio stuff was very useful because you're not distracted by the visuals, and therefore you feel like the task is not insurmountable. And there's something about, the word to inspire, to breathe in, it often reveals the pause, our syntax often reveals our psychology, and that really comes across on radio. And so I got her hesitations, the questions that she were asked revealed to me the doubts that she had about her own connection to what she was saying. And so it was a bit of detective work, really, to then try and work out her relationship to her own intellect and to the job, to sense when she was not telling the truth, when she was telling the truth. And so that was a really great starting point for me.
The missing, of course, was going right back into kind of classic sort of legend, and it, owing stuff to films like The Searchers and so on, and working with a kind of Hollywood man in Ron Howard. All those elements. But I guess just being in a Western, I'm sure every actor, certainly actors I've talked to have been in Westerns, it's just great, I've always wanted to do that. Although some actually hate horses, and so I wouldn't really want to be near
It's
them.
a problem.
Now, you had to do a lot of horse stuff in that.
Well, my father, being from Texas, was a great lover of Westerns, and so you'd always hear the gunshots from the other room on a Saturday afternoon. But that was never a genre that interested me at all. And I found The Searchers absolutely abhorrent. But it was, so it wasn't sort of a natural fit to me. But I talked to Ron, and the fantastic ride that I've had as an actor is that these projects have sort of taken me by surprise, and so I've delved into the genre kind of from a place of innocence to hopefully experience throughout the course of the shooting. And working with Tommy Lee Jones was definitely a highlight. And he actually, at one point, he's a man who doesn't mince his words. And at one point, he praised my equine management, which meant I was doing okay. But it was fantastic. It was one of those jobs where you know, life was extraordinary and the work was extraordinary, and it was so. I mean, we were filming in and around Los Alamos, you know, at the time that the Americans were going to war, and I thought, where they produce all the nuclear weapons in Los Alamos, and I thought, where the hell have I brought my family? And I mean, we found some remarkable Americans, and the landscape was incredible, and I mean, the work was fantastic.
And was it? I mean, you know, every journalist likes to ask the question about, you know, was it really tough, or you know, was there a 5-star hotel just round the corner? I mean, was it actually quite grueling on the trail there? I mean, did you actually rough it a bit?
I got a bit saddle sore. There was an awful lot of riding, and I'm really proud that, you know, 99.9% of it's me. At one point, the brew had sent a spider, so I had to have a tarantula crawl on me. And my deepest fear is spiders, obviously. I'm sure most people don't like having tarantulas crawl on them, so I'm not abnormal in that way. But Ron lay down on the floor in the production office and said, "Look, it's fine, it's fine." And he had the tarantula crawl over him and told me its name was Tara, and it was 9 years old. And then I said, "Okay, how can you say no when the director's got the tarantula on his crotch? You think you're just being a wuss if you don't do it." So I said, "Okay," and I let the tarantula crawl on me. And as it was crawling up me, I said, "It's been..." what do you call it, bled. You know when they bleed snakes and they get all the poison? I said, "You've bled it, haven't you?" And they said, "Oh no, you can't actually do that." So, and then I realised that it actually had all the poison in it. But they're quite docile, and if they get frightened, they stop. And then anyway, so I had this tarantula crawl on me, and then he decided to cut the scene after I... so it didn't even make it to the screen. But it did help me get over my fear of spiders.
Coming to Notes on a Scandal, Sheba Hart is a curious character, and quite sort of difficult to get hold of. I mean, she's a strange, flighty sort of figure.
She's quite gossamer,
yes.
Really. And what Patrick Marber did with the screenplay was absolutely make the film into its own entity. Because the book, Notes on a Scandal, What Was She Thinking? I really responded to the What Was She Thinking title. And it's a diarised account of the events, all from Judi Dench's character's perspective, and so the character of Sheba Hart, who I play, really needed to be liberated from that in order to make her sort of give her own voice. But she's a teacher who has an affair with an underage boy, a student, which is something that I just think, how could someone do? What would be attractive? I mean, forget the moral trespass for a minute. It's like, what could someone possibly find attractive in someone so young? Because once they open their mouths, no matter how tight their abs are, I'm lost, you know? And so that was tricky for me. But I think once I began to realise how lost she was, then it began to make sense for me. And something that was really useful for me, a description of Sheba in the novel, which I think Patrick kept in the screenplay, was describing her as a fey sort of person. But how lost and how fragile she is, I think, was ultimately my starting point.
Moving slightly swiftly on to The Aviator, you talked about playing Katharine Hepburn before, playing a real character, but again, not a slavish imitation, I don't think. I mean, I tend to think it's your version of her. I mean, but again, a lot of people would expect, you know, you must have pored over endless hours of footage of Hepburn to do the role. But I mean, how do you approach something like that? Because she's such a well-known, certainly as a screen image. We don't know her off screen particularly, but
not at all. I mean, she's intensely private. And it was also in a period where actors were very protected by the studio. So in terms of interviews, I mean, it's a very modern thing, this whole kind of recording of an actor's life off screen. But I mean, first of all, you ask Martin Scorsese, what do you want? What's the style of the film? And you realise that it's not a biopic about Hepburn, and you only have about 12 scenes to pack that extraordinary firebrand in, you know, as much as you can in much detail, whilst also serving your function in the film. And the great thing about working with Scorsese, obviously, is he screens everything. And so the Hepburn films I'd just seen as midday movies. So I knew she was a great actress, but I just didn't know how subtle her performances were. And when you see her earlier films projected, you really do see into the shifts, the nuances that perhaps were lost to me, her earlier performances when I saw them on the small screen. But another film that Scorsese really insistently showed us was His Girl Friday with Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant. The speed and the energy and the precision of the delivery, and of course he didn't ever say that to me, but he allowed me to put two and two together. That was what he was after with my entry point into the film. I think Scorsese really wanted in that first scene, the way it was written, that she come on with a bang, and so that was my function. And I hopefully fulfilled it. Which, you know, and you know when you embark upon the role that you are going to be. Some people are going to despise what you do because she's so owned and claimed by the audience, and they're going to be so shocked to see a young Hepburn in colour. So they're automatically going to be dislocated from what you do. And I mean, Scorsese was so kind in the beginning. He just said, you know, are you going to have a wig? Are you going to wear a red? She have red hair. Oh, he said, you don't have to wear a wig. You look great as you are. You know, and so he was basically trying to say to me, don't worry, whatever you do is fine, which is a great thing for a director to say to me.